to do before I get started?
Nope, you're all ready.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody to Rainwater Harvesting and Regenerative Earthworks. I'm Ben Tegeler. I'm an ecological designer. I do a lot of things, good and bad. But I run a design company called Ozark Mountain Permaculture, and then I also work for, sorry, I'm trying to get this squared away. Company called Custom Fooscaping out of St. Louis. And I'd also do some urban planning work with the city of Springfield. So I want to give a special thanks to the USDA and Springfield Community Gardens. These workshops are completely 100% free and provided through the Springfield Community Gardens with funding from the USDA. So shout out to them and support the gardens in any way, shape, or form that you can. So let's talk about who I am just for a quick bit. Ecological designer, permaculturist. My main job right now is dad. We have 3 little ones, and that takes up about 100% of my time. But like I said, I work with custom foodscaping, ecological design in St. Louis, and do that remotely mostly now. I got my PDC and with the Sonora, our permaculture design certification with the Sonora Permaculture Institute, which is in Tucson. And the main reason we went down there to do that and to do the trainings down there, which Tucson gets 11 inches of rain a year, is that some of those systems down there are thriving, and they get, they're basically desert and drought all the time compared to us up here who get 45 inches of rain annually, give or take. So we really wanted to learn how they're doing it down there with so much scarcity and thriving with so much diversity and utilizing every drop of rain that they get. I also have a degree in urban planning from Missouri State University, and then I've taken a lot of regenerative earthworks courses with Cliff Davis at Spiral Ridge Permaculture in Tennessee. I've worked with Mark Shepard of Restoration Agriculture and Darren Doherty of the Agrarians movement down in Australia. So I've got a diversity of techniques and teachers, and some of those teachers don't get along. So it's a very interesting dynamic in the water harvesting community. But we're going to start with water, of course. So chapter 1, water, plant the rain. Water sustains all life. Her songs beginning in the tiniest of raindrops, transform to flowing rivers, travel to majestic oceans and thundering clouds and back to earth again. When water is threatened, all living things are threatened. That was the Indigenous Declaration on Water in 2001. This image is, we were in Arizona for a lot of these trainings, but the Hopis and a lot of the natives down there would have massive rituals all in reverence. And I think that's something greatly we've lost when it comes to water and soil and life in general, is that all of this is a gift. So we start with reverence for water and the gift of life that it brings and the sustenance that it gives us each day. Some modern day folks that have taken those principles and have that reverence and connection with the water are these 4 gentlemen here have had a big effect on my life and my perception and philosophy on rainwater and harvesting and just connection with the land in general. So the gentleman on top left is Mr. Zephany Fury Massis. He was a South African farmer. He passed away a few years ago, but he inspired the 2 gentlemen on the bottom left, Brock Dolman of the Occidental Arts Ecological Center in California, and then Brad Lancaster, who's works with desert harvesters and harvesting rainwater in Arizona. And then also Bill Zedek with the Quivira Coalition in New Mexico. These kind of are the all-stars in North America. There's also Craig Sponholtz, who's doing a lot with these guys as well. But Brad Lancaster is a great storyteller, and he tells a story of when he went to Zimbabwe to meet Mr. Fury. And he was talking about leaving Tucson, Arizona. He only gets 10 inches of rain. It's urban sprawl. It's it's dying. He was going to move out of the city. And Mr. Fury tells him this quote: "You cannot leave. You must set your roots deeper than you ever thought possible, because if you run from your problems, you'll just plant problems everywhere you go." And he told him, "You must instead try to find solutions. If you succeed, you will then have the ability to find solutions anywhere." And if you know or have heard of Brad Lancaster at all, I mean, he took that to heart, and it kind of transformed his life. And he invested in Tucson, in his homestead there, and in the public realm, and changed zoning ordinances and changed codes and gray water codes and rainwater harvesting codes, and made it all. The city actually adopted a green infrastructure ordinance. It's one of the most progressive that we have in the nation. So he set his roots, and his saying is "plant the rain." So here's where I would usually do an exercise called "Become a Raindrop," where when we're outside, and it's a little different. So we'll do this digitally if we can. So just imagine yourself as a raindrop hitting the ground in a deep, lush forest with super humusy soils, and you're flowing down, and you flow to the creek, and it's just this very natural state. There's no necessarily runoff or percolation. Everything is absorbed. Everything is a huge sponge, and the water cycle is clean and continuous and continuous. You can see in those that graphic on the right there that water comes from the clouds, it hits the soil, it's transported and deposited. And when you have ground cover, and when you have life, biology and mulch and leaves and all sorts of organic matter, that water is absorbed. And then the opposite of that is when you have urban areas or impervious areas of rooftops and driveways and compacted soils and sidewalks and et cetera, where become that raindrop again and hit Campbell or Glenstone, and kind of, where do you go? You go into the stormwater system, you shoot it away as fast as you can. Or the modern philosophy in engineering on water is pipe it. Pipe it out as fast as you can, get it in, get it out. And there's no absorption. There's no, we don't use it as a resource. It's something that's a problem. We need to send it away, send it to Jordan Creek, send it to the culvert, send it far away, rather than the images on the bottom where, okay, I'm going to catch it, I'm going to store it, I'm going to then, transfer that overflow to a fruit tree, transfer that one to another tree, transfer that to the rain garden, and transfer that to the right of way. So as that raindrop hits my property, I'm trying to absorb and capture as much as that as possible. So whenever we do a design, and most professional designs will follow a scale of permanence. There's things that we can change and things that we can't change. And we always start with the climate, geography. So climate, we get 45 inches of rains. We're at 37 degrees latitude. There's things that we can't change, where this is our part of the earth, and this is how the sun and the elements affect us. And the same thing with geography. We're not going to, I guess you can change some of the topography and the but you can't change the bedrock, and you can't change certain things like that, soil types. And then water is the third. So before we ever do anything in the landscape, before we ever plant a plant or build anything, water comes first. We have to plant the rain, as Lancaster says. So some things we're going to discuss today: rainwater harvesting principles. We'll talk about site assessment, calculations, and surveying methods. We're going to talk about a few strategies here: building healthy living soil, swales, rain gardens, bioswales, tank cisterns, timber check dams, terraces, and simple grading. We'll talk about a few plants, and kind of the philosophies behind slow it, spread it, and sink it. Like I mentioned earlier, these are all more introductory things. So in the chat, please feel free at any time to just shoot a question there, and Hannah will catch it, and I'll answer it and kind of go from there. But
Ben, John Raven just put into the chat, Springfield definitely tried to get the rid of the rainwater quick, they rush it into Jordan Creek and out of town. Robin Noel says, I need your help. Please contact me.
All right. Well, we'll get there. I'm trying to find where my Zoom went. That's not there. Okay. Yeah, I can't see the chat popping up right now with the screen, but yeah, we'll get there, Robin. And yeah, I mean, as a municipality and as a civilization, look at Los Angeles, and we culvert all of our streams, and we intervene, and everything is an intervention that leads to another intervention that leads to another intervention, and we slowly disconnect ourselves from that web of life, and the resources that sustain us, which will lead to our eventual societal collapse unless we start at an individual and community and collective level of harvesting rainwater and growing food and et cetera. But Lancaster was such an inspiration for me because he did all this on his homestead in Tucson, and a lot of it he did illegally. He bored curb cuts into the street so water could percolate away from the culverts and into his yard to grow his mesquite trees and his oranges and citruses and all those things. So there are big policy changes that can come from this, and there's definitely a lot of education that has to be done, and we need more demonstrations in Southwest Missouri for sure. So moving forward with the 8, these are Lancaster's 8 rainwater harvesting principles, and I would always say that the principles, there's a reason we're starting here first rather than straight into the techniques. That the principles kind of run the show, and they're a filter for us to always look back and make sure that we're on the right track. So number 1 is the most important, and this is the same with permaculture or anything that you're doing in the landscape. Begin with long and thoughtful observation. Use all of your senses to see where the water flows and how, what is working, what is not. Build on what works. When we observe the topography and those water patterns and sources, it's fundamental to our water management plans. We really want to see how that water is flowing through our landscapes, and that means you have to get out there. When it was pouring down rain yesterday morning, me and the kids are out there. We're in our rain gear, we're in our rain boots, we're jumping in puddles, we're seeing how our systems are currently working. I love to get out there and make tweaks. So I get the shovel, I get the pickaxe, and see where water's puddling and how I want it to move, and make simple changes. But that relationship begins with that long and thoughtful observation. So keep that in mind, take that to heart. If you don't learn anything besides this workshop, just that one right there should be enough to get out there and see and interact with the rainscape. Number 2, start at the top or the high point of your watershed and work your way down. Usually in the urban areas, our high points are the tops of our roof. If not, it's going to be the farthest point, the highest elevational point on your property. For us, that's all the way to the north. We have a 6-foot drop. We'll see some images of that from high point to low point. But you start at the high point, and we want to utilize gravity to help us. The stream starts at the headwater, and that'd be the top of the mountain, and then it ends in the ocean eventually, which would be the low point. Water travels downhill, start at the top where there's less volume and velocity, so it's easier to follow the next principle. Number 3, start small and simple. Work at the human scale so you can build and repair everything. 1,000 small strategies are far more effective than one big one when you're trying to infiltrate water into the soil. This is going to be a huge part of what we talk about today, the small and simple and the small scale systems, rather than getting the excavator out and building some big swales that can be destructive. So number 4, spread and infiltrate the flow of water. Rather than having water run erosively off the land surface, encourage it to stick around, walk around, and infiltrate into the soil. We want the water to crawl through the landscape. That crawling through the landscape, we want that slow spread sink. We don't want any of those raindrops to leave our property before they are adding nourishment to our plants or our soil, or filling our ponds or our rainwater tanks or whatever the case may be. Number 5, always plan for an overflow route and manage that overflow water as resource. Always have an overflow for the water in times of extra heavy rains, or use that overflow as a resource. An example of that is our rainwater tank. So when that rainwater tank overflows, it goes to a bioswale to the pawpaws. And then if that pawpaw detention area overflows, and it goes to our, our rain garden. And then after that, it hits the culvert. So making sure that you have overflow routes is a very important principle as well. Number 6, maximize living organic ground cover. Create living sponge so that the harvested water is used to create more resources, while the soil's ability to infiltrate and hold water steadily improves. I'll talk about this briefly, but I know it's one of the most important things. Number 7, maximize beneficial relationships and efficiency by stacking functions. Your water harvesting strategies do more than hold water. Berms or swales can double as high and dry raised paths or sunken paths. Plantings can be placed to cool buildings. Trees can be selected to provide food. A lot of our swales at our property, we filled the actual swale with 2 to 3 foot of mulch. And just recently I cleaned out all that mulch, and it was composted down and had a lot of fungal material in there that I then feed to the fruit trees. So I'm composting in place essentially. Sometimes I'll add cover crops to those mulched swales, and then I'll bring in the chickens and they'll scratch it all up and turn it. And then when I move them out there, I'm ready to add it to the trees. So it's not just about the rainwater harvesting. It could also be your rainwater tanks act as a fence, acts as a screen, acts as a espalier place for a fruit tree. So maximize those beneficial relationships and think in relationships. We'll get more into that. Number 8, continuously reassess your system, the feedback loop, learn from your work. We begin again with the first principle, which is the observe and interact. So continuous relationship, that reverence, that it's not you're a part of this, you're a part of the story, you're this human on this little earth, and there's clouds and rain. We've kind of lost our way with some of that simplicity, but always reassess your system. Get out there in the rain. Is your swale working? How's your overflow going? What plants are thriving, etc. So we've got our principles. We're going to jump into site assessment. The principles are the core of successful water harvesting. They apply equally to the conceptualization, design, and implementation of all techniques and water harvesting landscapes. You must integrate all the principles, not just your favorites, to realize the site's full potential. Used together, these principles greatly enhance success, dramatically reduce mistakes, and enable you to adapt and integrate the range of strategies to meet the site needs. While the principles remain constant, the strategies used to achieve them will vary with each site. So moving from principles to site assessment, we want to read the landscape and understand topography. What's our context? What are we trying to do? Are we trying to harvest rainwater to use inside our house? Are we trying to water plants? Are we growing food? Are we growing annuals? Are we growing perennials? Are we growing perennial flowers? What's the purpose? Let's not just catch water to catch water. Where's that water going and how are you going to use it? We talk a lot about contour lines. You have this statement here, what the hell is a contour line? We'll talk about impervious surfaces, runoff rate and coefficient, soil type and capacity, sources and flows, indicator plants, and you have to do a site assessment. This is a danger zone. You have to take time to assess. There's that little guy down there with the magnifying glass and the raindrop. We are landscape detectives. Get out there, see how the water flows, see what plants are going, all that. So we can see on this top right image of a sectional cut of a hillscape on the contour lines, 1400, 1300, 1200, and 1100. And then the 2D image underneath So all these lines on a contour map represent a point in elevation. So a contour line is simply a line across the landscape that is at the same elevation. That's the most basic basic definition we have. And you can see here, these guys are marked contours, and it's the same all the way. So if this is 10 foot, mine's going to be that same elevational point. And I do have a video that will kind of better explain that. When we do these workshops in person, we'll usually have a big amount of topsoil, and we can kind of dig and see and pour water on it and see how water would go across the contour line. Water hits contour at a 90-degree angle, so it's always hitting it straight on. So if you build a berm or a swale on the back end of that contour, it's gonna pull up and collect and infiltrate. So we talked about the site assessment. You can always start with a base map. The city of Springfield's GIS has contour maps on their website for Greene County and Christian County and surrounding counties. You can always contact the assessor and see if they'll give you a map, or we do create base maps and other maps using LiDAR data and some other data. But for this property here, this is Stanford Community Garden. You can see this is the highest contour in the landscape. This is, these two properties are the properties in question, but all the water that we can control is on our property. So the high point's here, and all the water flows down to the low point down here. But each of these represent an elevational point above sea level. So say this is 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. This is a 1 foot drop across the landscape. So I'm gonna let Andrew Millison discuss this a little more. So this is just a short 2-minute clip. He's using a sandbox virtual reality tool that's pretty amazing. Essentially, it's showing all the contours he builds. Where you move the sand, it creates a contour line, and then if you roll your hand over it, it makes it rain and show water. So check this out real quick, and be back in 2 minutes.
So we're going to talk about another technique now that's used in drylands for establishing trees on a slope. We call these boomerang swales. Here, we're going to create a network of V or U-shaped berms, so rain that falls on every part of the landscape is concentrated at the point of the V. So you can see here, as we rain down the slope and the water just rapidly moves down the slope away and is not retained. So in a landscape here that we don't have a lot of soil absorption, we've got a lot of runoff, we have compacted soils, we have rocky soils. The feature that I'm about to put in here is meant for those types of conditions, especially dry lands with little infiltration in the soil. So you can see now that I have created this series of boomerangs going down the slope. And now, when it rains across the landscape and we have water running off, it is collected in the boomerangs. Ideally, the overflow from the boomerangs is on the side here. I'm making it rain really fast, and this fluid doesn't necessarily follow the path that actual water would follow. But ideally, each one of these basins in the rain on a slope that really has very little infiltration, now the water will concentrate in the bottoms of each of these basins. It's not just water that'll concentrate, it's anything that water washes in. Mulch, animal manures, all sorts of particles will concentrate there, making a really good microclimate within these basins for establishing trees. So this is really a tree establishment method here. And I will I'll put some trees in here. So, I mean, areas like we have.
All right. Well, if you've never seen one of those sandbox tools, Andrew Millison, he was working for the University of Oregon, but those sandbox tools, I was trying to figure out a way to to get that concept across and show how water would flow across the landscape. So I hope that does it. They have a lot more videos using those tools for a deeper understanding of contours and how water moves across the landscape. So hopefully that does it justice. If anybody needs any clarification on contour lines or reading topography, please let me know. So continuing the site assessment, we want to, that land detective, we want to know on our sites, basically make a big checklist, do the huge site assessment of everything that you can think of and become that landscape detective. You know, where are your impervious surfaces? Where's your erosion? Where is water currently infiltrating? What's the runoff coefficients of those? So if you have a metal roof, you know, water's coming off very fast. If you have a concrete driveway, that water steaming up and, you know, getting out of the drive as fast as possible. This kind of image kind of shows our modern day situation, but documenting all those impervious surfaces and figuring out the calculations on those, and we'll talk about calculations later. But different soil types have different capacities for infiltration and drainage. So what's your soil type? You know, do you have clay? Is it sandy? Is it well drained? Is it gravelly, etc.? If you have clay soils, you know, you're probably going to pond. It's not going to infiltrate. It's going to seal up. Is it well drained and sandy or gravelly? Then it's probably going to infiltrate more. Does it have a ton of organic matter? Really identify what is currently existing in your yard or homestead or landscape, and document that before you ever do any earthworks, because the earthworks are dependent on the soil, and the systems are dependent on the capacity of those soils. Follow the natural drainage. Where does the water naturally want to go? You get out there in a rainstorm and you see where things pool, or you see where little streams are created temporarily, little ephemeral streams and little ephemeral pools that happen. How can you build upon that? How can you continue where water wants to go or help it? In the urban areas, we've done a lot of damage to our natural drainage, so we may not have that. But even in my yard, used to be a stream there. I go back to the aerial photography from 1937, and you can see that there's a little stream that went through a big open field, and that stream still comes when we get a big rain. It comes through the valley from Madison Street all the way down through a bunch of backyards and ends in the valley by a big sycamore in our yard. But it actually creates a creek that I've taken the canoe out on. I'll show you a picture at the end of our yard flood and how we had to mitigate some of that. Sources and flows, you know, mark every gutter on your map, you know, on your house, figure out where all your gutters are, how big they are, where they're coming from, all the streets, all the paths, all the roofs. Again, the driveways and soils, where are your areas that you can harvest water from? So if you have impervious surfaces, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You just have to direct that water into a structure where you can utilize it as a resource rather than sending it to the Wilson or the Jordan Creek or the James. Another site assessment technique, you know, the indicator plants, you know, what's growing there? Do you have Bermudas growing? Do you have elderberry? Do you have sycamores? Do you have oaks? Do you have prickly pear? You know, what's growing on your site that would tell you the water resource you have? Is it wet? Is it dry? What's currently growing? Again, you have to do the site assessment. You have to take the time to interact and build that relationship with your site and kind of put on a new pair of lenses or glasses and change your perspective of how you work with the site and how water works with your site. So this is a danger zone. Take time to assess. If you don't do your homework and don't do the grunt work and you build a system and it fails, there's a lot of liability with that. If you build a swale and it overflows and, you know, comes into your foundation, or you build it too close to your foundation and you wash out your house or wash out your neighbor's yard, you know, so you need to be careful and be mindful of that. So danger zone, take time to do the site assessment. So this is another example of, this is a LiDAR map, but all the blue arrows, this is the tallest point in the landscape where it's red. So these reds are the mountaintops. So this is the tippity top of the mountain. And down here where it's blue are these valleys and streams. And the LiDAR is really cool because it's got a depth to it, and you can really see how water would move across this landscape. It comes down here, all the way down and settles in this saddle, and then it overflows down into the valley and goes all the way down to the stream. This is up near St. Louis, so all this sheds to the Mississippi River. But it kind of gives you an idea and a deeper understanding of that topography and how water moves across the landscape. More urban context, this is the Victory Mission, North Springfield, North Broadway, and Commercial Street. All this water's coming through. You can see the green lines, and it's definitely not as smooth and natural as this landscape. We've had grading and urbanization here for, late or early 1800s. So water coming down in the parking lot, lots of water coming off the street, pulling up. When you do a site assessment, where is the water pooling, kind of all that kind of stuff we just talked about. But just simple drawings or simple mental notes of how the water is flowing through your landscape. Again, observe and interact. Get out and play in the rain. Put on your rain boots, put on your rain jacket, get your rain gear on, and get out there and just watch it. I can't emphasize that enough. That is a core principle. We are going to jump now into this calculation and then into some surveying stuff, but I would take a screenshot of this, and I will share a Google Drive at the end that has a bunch of water resources with all sorts of different calculations and give some more information. So this is the most mystifying part to rainwater harvesting, and definitely in the beginning. You want to calculate how much water would fall in any given area. And size, the necessary storage size for your container or for your rain basin or your swale or whatever that case may be. Once you start doing these calculations, you quickly find that a lot of water comes through your site when you put a gallon number on it. So off a roof or parking lot with just a ½ inch of rain or an inch of rain. So accounting for that, your surfaces and gutters and how you're going to divert those flows and where they can go can help you understand really how to use that resource and give you an appropriate context for how to use it. So this is the rainwater calculation with the runoff coefficient for our house here in West Springfield. Essentially, we're going to take the length and width of our roof. We have a very simple roof, so it's a simple calculation. It's just a square, 28 foot by 29 foot, which is 812 square feet. And then we get 45 inches of rain a year, and we want our measurement in feet. So 45 divided by 12 inches equals 3.75. And we multiply that by 7.48 gallons to convert it to gallons. And then the runoff coefficient of our roof is 0.95. So we have a high runoff coefficient, which means how fast water is leaving that and how much water is not being lost to evaporation or transpiration or anything like that. If you have an asphalt roof or something tar, where water might stick and it might not make it to the tank. So the metal roof, as long as it doesn't have a toxic enamel or anything like that, is a clean surface where you're going to get a lot of water. Say organic matter, like a mulch basin, that's probably going to have a runoff coefficient of 0.2, a lot less because you're getting a lot more absorption. Concrete driveway is probably the same thing of 0.95 or 0.9, very high runoff. So we want to utilize those high runoff areas and direct them where we can use them. So 812, 3.75 times 7.48 times 9.5 is 21,637 gallons annually come off this roof. That's a lot of water for such a tiny structure, 28 foot by 29 foot. So We are currently sizing tanks to purchase for our site. We have a 480-gallon tank that we have. We're looking anywhere between 2,000 and 5,000-gallon tanks for this. Currently, our gutters go out here, and they go into a rain basin here. And then this one goes over to our hazelnuts and our pawpaws and some oaks and other plants that we've planted. But these rainwater calculations are definitely an integral part of calculating and figuring out your spaces. You can do this for bare ground or, you know, grass, lawn. Like I said, I have the calculation kind of handbook that is in a Google Drive that I will share with everyone at the end of this. So once we integrate those principles, do our site assessment, and do our calculations, we're ready to survey and line things out. There's a few simple ways to survey. In that Google Drive, I also have documents on how to create some of these more simplistic ones and how to use them. But the most permaculturally ones that people often see is this A-frame, which is essentially 2 1x sticks with a horizontal brace and a level or a plumb bob in the middle, and you move it from point to point. And when this level, the bubble's in the middle, you have found the contour line. It's the same elevation across the landscape, and you'll mark a flag and mark it out. Same thing with the bunyip water level. This is essentially a 1x piece of wood with a measuring stick on it, and you have a piece of clear 1/2-inch tubing that you fill with water, and water always finds its level. But you need 2 people for this one. With the A-frame, you need 1 person. They don't take any power once you have them, and they're pretty good tools to have along the landscape. So with the bunyip and the water level, 2 people, and you sit at different elevations. This one would read 42, 35. So they need to go up, they need to go down. And then once the water is in the tube and it's reaching the same measuring stick on both sides, that's where you mark it level and you found your contour line for whatever strategy you use to harvest water. Again, I have more details on these and how to make them and an understanding. I have moved completely to the laser level land. It's definitely a faster and easier thing for more professional service, or if you have big swaths of land. You know, say some of you all on that 5 acre, this bunyip and this A-frame, it's going to take you a while to mark it out. So you can rent these laser levels for $40-50 from any rental place that rents out equipment. This is a Bosch 500-foot laser level, and you can see just 1 person this shoots a laser, it hits this remote, and then you mark your flag and mark your contour. So this is the Rogers lot here. You set it high in the landscape just like you would your tank, and you can flag out contours fairly quickly. And I can even do it with my son on my back here. So it's very, very handy for 1 person, and if you're on bigger sites. If not, the bunyip, if you have 2 people on a smaller site, is very great. No power, no batteries, and it's always a good fallback plan. Same thing with the A-frame. 1 person can do it, move across the landscape. It doesn't take any energy once you've already created it. There's a lot of other surveying techniques, but the bunion's low tech, the A-frame's low tech, and the laser level's medium and user-friendly. And you have all these other ones that get quite expensive as time and energy come. So, any questions on site assessment, surveying, or anything we've talked about so far? We're going to jump into some more water harvesting strategies, give you a quick rundown of some of these and how we utilize them. So we want to harvest stormwater, rainwater, and any water that comes on our property in a variety of ways to create some water resilience. The roof water catchment, on-site water infiltration are 2 major harvesting techniques that are used throughout many different kinds of landscapes. If we're doing any bigger systems, ponds, are things that could affect our neighbors or affect downstream in a major way, you know, you always want to consult with an engineer and professionals. And before you consult with those engineers, really do your site assessment, do all your homework, and mark everything out so you have a great idea of what you want before you go in there. Because most engineers don't think in a lot of these realms. They are still in the pipe it away phase. So sorry, Jeremy, to call out the engineers, but Hannah, did you have something?
Yeah, Ben, we have a question from Christopher Smith. How close together do you mark your contour lines on the typical project?
So yeah, that kind of depends on your calculations and your runoff coefficient. But in our yard, they're probably about 6 foot, 8 foot. And it depends how steep it is and how much drop there is. And kind of what sort of system are you're doing. If we were doing kind of big Berman Basin swales, I'm going to what am I planting in those swales? What's my overall context? Am I planting a pecan? Am I planting an apple tree? Am I planting blueberries? So if they're blueberries, maybe I'm going to space those contour lines 10 foot apart. So I have 5 foot rows. If I'm doing pecans, I'm going to be doing 50 to 60 foot, spreads. So it depends on the context of really what you're trying to accomplish with the water harvesting, and what you're trying to grow. So they could be anywhere from on my more urban beds where my annual agriculture is, they're probably 2 or 3 foot apart marking out. And if you put your paths on contour as well, which is use your path as a water harvesting structure as well. It all depends on what you're trying to do. But was that the only question, Hannah?
Yes, and Christopher says, okay, makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, you'll hear me say a lot, it depends, because I'm not on your property. I don't know what type of soils you have. I haven't done the site assessment, and I don't know what you're trying to grow, and how much water is coming through the site. So it all depends. People love that. Clients love it when I say that. They just want a black and white answer of tell me what to do, and doesn't work like that most of the time. So we're going to jump into some water harvesting techniques. Hooray. And one of the great unsung heroes, Hannah.
Hi. Ben Jeremy says, as a landscape architect, I will keep trying to train the civil engineers to be sustainable.
Yeah. And I mean, I work with engineers a lot, and it's definitely all the training and all everything's on roads, and they do their jobs very well, but it's infiltration and sponging water is not on the radar. And I think that's evolving very fast with the flooding in Houston and a lot of more of the biological methods. And we're moving into hopefully an ecological restoration mecca where we start ripping up concrete and we start reintegrating natural systems into our landscapes with example in Springfield would be daylighting Jordan Creek, which is a big project that's moving forward, and South Creek on Sunset, where they have started to do some induced meandering and reintegrate native or natural water flows. Still urbanized, still a lot of water, still a lot of concrete, but getting our foot in the door and starting to change the direction of that. But jumping back into the healthy living soil, one of the great unsung heroes of water management is healthy soil itself. And oftentimes focusing on healthy soil may be the most effective technique of all to slow spread and sink water. Healthy soil acts as a sponge to absorb and hold water as it comes down from the sky or across surfaces. The primary activity in building soil is the introduction of both organic matter and living soil biology. By adding organic matter through compost teas, cover crops, or whatever strategy you use, mulching, the soil will provide immediate sponge functions to that area. To speed up the productions and cycle of the biological function in your soil, you can introduce the compost teas, mycorrhizal inoculants to your plants, fungus, and other organisms as inoculants to help support the microbiology of the existing sites. So I started with this one, which I think is the most important technique that there is. I've built a lot of swales, and we've installed a lot of tanks and a lot of small ponds and a lot of things. And even on my property, my swales work. I'll give them that, but I would not do it again. I would move more to these less aggressive and less intervening, earthworks. You're destroying landscapes. You're digging, you're mounding, you're excavating, you're engineering, you're changing the landscape in a drastic way, where nature builds soil and builds sponges and marshes and wetlands. And how do we mimic that before we ever pick up the shovel or get in the excavator? Those things have their place, more for traumatized landscapes, but we want to build on what we already have. And if we have a healthy system already, I would say that there's no need to intervene. We can use some of these low intervention techniques of building soil and nurturing the soil food web, and with living biologically active compost and lots of organic material and mulches. I've gotten about 15 dump truck loads full of mulch since I've been back in Springfield, and spreading that. In some places we've dug up driveways, 4 foot of gravel, and just put a bunch of mulch in there and cover crop it. And that has been immensely beneficial, more than some of the swales that we have operating. Just having organic material and organic matter and plants and roots in the ground, and then the biology in the soil that are really cycling nutrients and building healthy soil. The NRCS has this infographic that's pretty popular in the world today, but it says healthy soil has amazing water retention capacity. Every 1% increase in organic matter results in as much as 25,000 gallons of available soil water per acre. So we talked about my roof earlier, 21,000 gallons roughly. If I would add, and it's a half-acre lot, so if I would add a 1% increase in organic matter on my property, I could mitigate all that water without any cisterns or tanks or anything, and just go straight into the soil, absorbing it without any runoff, which is pretty amazing. Soil is king in my eyes, and queen, and should always be the first strategy. Okay, now that I got that out of the way, living soil, do it. We can move to some more regenerative earthworks. Start small. Before we get into techniques, always start small. If you do pick up the shovel, pick up the pickaxe, pick up the fork, pick up the rake. The equipment versus manual labor, if you mess up, you can, with a shovel, you can fix it with a shovel. You mess up with an excavator, you mess up with the skid steer, you mess up with the dozer, you're bringing those back in to fix it, and you're constantly setting your system back in ecological succession. You're destroying and intervening more than necessary. Now, there is a time and place for that equipment, but when you're learning, you always want to start small. Start high in the landscape. Start with the pickaxe. Start with the shovel. Do a little test swale. Do a little test system, and then come back, see how it's working, make a tweak. And when you get the hang of it and you start building that relationship and seeing what your land and water resources really are and what you need, you can pull out the equipment. I use equipment on what I call traumatized landscapes. So there's compaction, there's, maybe you ripped up a parking lot, maybe it's a big urban wasteland, maybe it needs remediation for lead or heavy metals. But I've learned, and I've made the mistake of using equipment on healthy sites, and that's just a mistake I guess I had to make. But the equipment should be used on those situations. They cause a lot of compaction. You can cause a lot of damage real fast. So we're going to jump into I don't even know how to describe swales. The big permaculture thing that when people think of permaculture, usually swales are the thing that pops up. And when people get out of permaculture design courses, they usually go into their yard and start creating these big swale systems. And I've done it, and I can kind of pick on myself with it, but you get this big idealistic thing that I'm going to go build a bunch of swales, and that may not be appropriate to your landscape. But a swale is essentially a contour infiltration ditch, or swale it's commonly referred to. It's a ditch that runs along contour. Engineers have different definitions of swales. There's divergent swales and all sorts of other technical terms. So if you're talking engineers and you say swale, they're going to have a different meaning for this. So keep that in mind if you're working with any professionals in that realm. So that contour means that every point along the line is at the same elevation. That means when that contour infiltration ditch is dug out, it fills with water. You can see on those images on the top left, that's a infiltration swale. The water will be like a bathtub without rushing to one end or the other. The systems can be incredible for catching, infiltrating, and spreading water in the landscape. Well, again, while there's incredible benefits, there are also potential drawbacks. We need to be mindful and contextual in placing swales in an environment. Anytime we catch and hold large quantities of water at one time, we have responsibility to ensure the system is designed well to avoid any large-scale erosion or flooding events. Swales can be used in many environments with various soils, but its benefits can be beyond infiltration, as providing well-drained planting areas, nutrient catchment zones, retention areas for capturing runoff, and many more practical applications. So we'll talk about, I have a lot of slides on swales here, but basically the idea is that this is all level. If you're following my mouse here, this is all level all the way across the ground. So water enters in from this way, sits in this basin, and charges this area. You can see here the runoff water comes down, it hits the swale, and it creates this underground plume almost that your roots can go down into from your trees. This works well with perennial trees and shrubs, but again, it's not the savior that a lot of people in the permaculture world and being introduced to the permaculture world believe it is. There's definitely a gradient. The 3-to-1 and 2-to-1 slopes, maybe even the 4-to-1, are probably the best for the swales. If you get too steep or too level, there's not really a point to do that. So I like swales, but you can hear in my voice and probably see on my face I have some apprehension. You always want to design that overflow. These don't have overflows, so if this ever filled up, it would just go over the berm and wash out your berm and could wash out your plants. We do have an overflow back here. This is from drought-proof Texas, outside of Austin. So yeah, I'll jump to some more things. Diversion swales are something I'm definitely more of a fan of. They're not on contour, they're a little off contour. This is more of what I recommend if you are going to do a swale, is you want that water to crawl. You don't want it to sit and puddle like that, or that's my opinion. And that's all it is. Everyone does this a little differently. But the diversion swales, we are essentially making it a little off contour. So every elevational point, we're dropping it 6 inches over 150 feet, or 1 inch, I'm sorry, 1 inch over 150 feet, or 1 inch over 300 feet. To make that water kind of crawl across the landscape. So it's not completely level, it's got a little tilt to it, so that water, you're directing it somewhere. So we can direct it off our roof and into this basin, and that one can overflow into that basin. So it's a tool more to move water rather, and you can still infiltrate if you make it crawl and have a small slope. So here's a diversion swale in our yard that I'm currently retrofitting. This is a swale for my annual garden. So Chris asked how far apart. So this is a swale here, and there's another swale here and another swale here. You can't necessarily see them when they're mulched and vegetated anymore, but when you build them, they're definitely noticeable. So water flows in through this river rock path. I haven't decided if this will be mulch or gravel, and it percolates and sits down here and charges this pawpaw patch. And there's a Montmorency cherry, currant bushes, St. John's wort, some raspberries, and a ton of plants just in this little patch. So I take all the water from my driveway, which is over here, and I shoot it and pump it into this patch over here. So these are some current existing swales in my backyard. You can see this top left picture. I destroyed this yard. I brought in, I started with a pickaxe, and then a friend had a machine, and I said, yeah, come over. And if you're gonna bring a machine, make sure you get a professional, and you know what you are doing and know what you want to guide them. If not, you rent the machine yourself and you practice before you ever get out there. But you can see we jacked this up. It was a healthy yard. It was healthy soil. It's not a very steep slope. It was unnecessary intervention on my part. So this is about 6 years ago. After fresh out of a PDC and fresh out of a Brad Lancaster Rainworks harvesting workshop, and hit the ground running, and ignored everything I told you, basically. So while these systems do work, they are very destructive. If you do use machines, you make sure not to pile your subsoil on top of your topsoil, separate your topsoil, build your basins and things with the subsoil first, and then come back and put the topsoil on top, and seed immediately. Seed or put your plants in the ground immediately. You can't let these be bare. Mother Nature does not like to be bare. So put some armor on her with some plants and some ground covers and cover crops or whatever you may have on hand. You can see I sheet mulched all this too. It was a mess. I would not do it again. Having said that, it does work. These are big infiltration basins, and they're big surge basins. So these are designed for 7 inches of rain at one time. With climatic change and a lot of wacky weather patterns, especially in the Ozarks, and maybe snowing one day, you may get 7 inches of rain, you may get, whatever. We design for catastrophe. So we always add an extra percentage on some of our calculations. So this is a big berm. This is this one back here. If you're following my mouse, I've got a plum here. I've got some McKinsey chokeberries. There's hazelnuts back here. There's a bunch of native rain plants and pawpaws and false indigos and peaches and more chokeberry and echinacea and elderberries and blah, 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 lots of plants. But the water comes down here. It hits its infiltration basin that's filled with mulch now, and percolates and charges this whole area. This is blueberries. And this one, you can't really tell, but these are like 6 blueberries right here. The water flows into the basin, charges in the mulch, and waters all the plants. I have never watered any of these plants back here in this system. So that is a benefit of swales, is or even micro swales, just building how Andrew Milson talked about those boomerang swales at the beginning with that sandboxes. These can be great tools for infiltrating water and getting establishment, but you can do it with a pickaxe, and you can do it very, very minimally. You don't have to build these giant things, but getting plants established and non-irrigation was my goal with this project. Is I don't want to water, and if I have to water and the plant dies, or if I have to water, I don't want to. I want a system that's as self-maintaining and self-regulating as possible. So plant the rain, right? Is kind of the goal here of harvesting as much water as possible and having the plants survive without human inputs. Here's some other swales on a more of a hillside. This was a heavily logged area and had a lot of invasives that we had to remove. So we removed, this was covered in winter creeper or Euonymus forte. So once we removed all this Euonymus, there was a lot of erosion. So we had to do something to control the erosion. So we created these diversion swales that catch water and divert it away from the structure, which is down here, and planted all these with pawpaws and cherries and peaches and plums and all more of the native cultivars and food production plants that we can grow here in the Ozarks. You can see here I was using a backhoe I'm usually a one-man wrecking crew, so machines are relevant on more of the professional side of things, just so from a timing and labor standpoint. Again, mistakes are tools for learning. You want to evaluate your trials. Making mistakes is a sign you're trying to do things better. So don't let my my mistakes keep you from making your own. But I'm trying to be transparent that don't make the same mistakes I have made, and really do your site assessment and really think before you ever put the shovel in the ground or fire up that machine. I actually had to take out this swale. I had a shed right there, and you should never put an earthworks harvesting structure within 10 foot of a building or a foundation, because those plumes that happen under a swale or under a diversion swale is going to put that water right at the base of your foundation, break the integrity of your structure. So I actually had to come back with the machine and undo all of this destruction that I already did. Now this is a road, and it will eventually be a nursery. So mistakes are tools for learning. That kind of brings me to a point about swales of compaction and loose soil. When you build a pond or a dam or something like that, you want to compact it. When you build swales, you actually want it very loose and crumbly. You want to sponge it. So keep that in mind. This is more of a hugelkultur swale. Hugelkultur is where you use timber or wood. I had to cut down an elm tree to get some more sun into our property. You can see this is how it started. This used to be a driveway. It was 4 foot deep of gravel, wraparound drive. We dug up all the rocks. We built a basin there, and then we slowly filled it with woody material. There's all sorts of stumps, and this tree here is in this grave, this big mound, and it's heavily planted with native perennials. There's some prickly pear up there, and golden seals, and echinaceas, and Culver's root, and there's raspberries on the other side and cherries on the other side. But just to show there's lots of techniques and lots of ways to do it, and you want to use what you have on site. I had an elm tree on site. I didn't want to haul it away, so I buried it, built a little swale, and put a dam here. This is compacted gravel, and you'll see why at the end this whole yard flooded, and I had to actually keep water out because we're at the bottom of the valley, and use the culvert system. It's not always a bad thing. Sometimes you may have too much water for your system, and you want to utilize draining it away. So yeah, so this is our house now, and this was the house before. So you can see down here that this water, these rocks are a good reference point here. Rocks, that this whole thing flooded. And you can see the canoe there that I rode all the way down the street in the canoe. So we've built a big kind of a dam there, and we've done a bunch of induced meandering and heavy earthworks to build a stream underground to divert water away. I talked about how this used to be a stream here in 1937, and we kind of recreated a stream bed underneath with some piping and gravel to help channel some of this water to the culverts, rather than making a nice beachfront property when we get a heavy downpour. I love this graph. Should I swale that? I got this from Ben Falk. He's up in Vermont. He's got a book called Resilient Farm and Homestead. But on the left here is where swales are appropriate. On the right here, it's less appropriate. So when we swale, we have a mid-sized slope. We have shallow bedrock and permeable compacted, high water table, brittle landscape, and low precipitation. We're planting perennials. We're less mechanized, early succession plants, and we have more time and currency. It's less appropriate when we have a slope less than 3 or more than 15, erosion-prone, stable, fertile, deep, well-drained soils. So again, those healthy soils, non-brittle landscapes. We get 45 inches of rain. In Tucson, they get 11, so it's brittle. We're not so brittle with our rain here. And a thing about swales too is the management of them. I have to weed eat all this. I can't run a mower on it, and I have to watch every single one of these plants. And people talk about swales and permaculture and food forests as being low maintenance. There's definitely maintenance. You're not gonna escape that. So these are highly maintained systems at the beginning. Eventually, they do grow up and take little time and energy to maintain them, but at the beginning, there is maintenance involved. So this is a broadacre style of swales. This is a 50-acre farm in Ohio that we visited and participated in Mark Shepard's workshop. So you can see they got a big machine up there, and they're going across this entire 50-acre landscape, building these massive swale systems that feed big ponds high in the landscape, and then you can gravity feed that pond. So this is a mixture of keyline design and some heavy swale systems, and all of these, they're called feeder swales, and these feeder swales slowly percolate water. You plant trees and flowers and perennials on the berm, and then they overflow into the pond, and then that pond overflows into another pond. But this is good for hydrating a dehydrated landscape. I don't know if I would have the gumption to be able to do this to my farm. It's very expensive, and it's a huge investment, and I'm interested to follow back up with them here this year and go back out there and see how they like their system. Some people have taken Shepard's installations and done them, and then went back and undid them. So very context-based. If your goal is to hydrate landscapes, this could be in the cards, but again, very destructive, and be very mindful of using this, because you could easily get these hydrated landscapes with the regenerative grazing and cover cropping and building soil rather than, carving into the earth in such a way. Food for thought. All right. Any question on swales? Hannah?
We have a question from Marcy. Curious if swales provide a prime environment for mosquito breeding.
So that's a great question. That comes out a lot. If the swale is compacted, and it holds water for more than a few days, you're definitely going to get mosquitoes. But the goal of this swale is to have that fluffy sponge-like water, so it should drain really fast within a day or two. Our swales don't have water in them for more than a few hours. So again, that's a design question, and how porous and the type of soils you have. So if you build a big clay swale, a swale on clay soil, and it fills up it's going to fill up with water, and it's going to act like a pond, and it's not going to drain. It's going to sit there as long as it can until it evaporates or transevaporates or eventually percolates through the tight pores. If you do it on a well-draining gravelly soil or a sandy soil, or just you've built a lot of soil on the swale, it should drain very quickly. So it depends on your soil type, and depends on how much water's coming through in the context. But I would say if the swale is designed appropriately and correctly, and is functioning as designed, and there's plants and establishment on there, you're not going to have a mosquito problem. If it's designed poorly, and clay soil and designed like a pond, and water ponds rather than infiltrates, then you're going to have mosquitoes for sure. All right, we'll move into rain gardens, bioswales, and infiltration basins. These are all, in my mind, the same word. People call rain garden, people call bioswale, people call it an infiltration basin. Whatever you want to call it, we're basically harvesting water into a depression, into an infiltration basin. We're putting native plants there, or native shrubs, and I guess they don't have to be native. Be wise of caterpillar birds and bees and bugs and owls and hawks and moles, and the list goes on. But we're basically just creating a ditch or a basin, harvesting the water, providing an overflow, and planting it. So as a rain garden right for your site, this is from the Missouri Botanical Gardens. On the left, this flow chart. You know, and determine your rain garden size and depth, decide which elements you're going to include, how's the water going to flow, selecting your plants, tool supplies, lay it out and dig, plant the garden, and maintain. On the left, we have a very, very, very simple rain garden that's harvesting all the water off of a parking lot. You can see there's lots of pollutants and lots of yucky stuff in there, you know, coolant and maybe transmission fluid. And, you know, there's a lot of leaky vehicles here. This is at the Victory Mission. Again, so we don't really want to plant a bunch of edibles right here. So we plant things with deep root systems and high biomass and even phytoremediating plants, which means the plants soak up the toxins into their bodies and into themselves and mitigate the toxins in the environment. Some plants are better than others on doing that. Sunflowers are a really good phytoremediation plant, and a lot of grasses and sedges and fungal mushrooms have a great capacity. So inoculating your mulch with either, you know, any mushroom you see fit, but some mushrooms again are better than others for mitigating whatever toxins are in your environment. But there's also some service berries and pawpaws kind of on the farther periphery, and some shrubs. So the native plants filter the pollutants, catch it. There's a rock basin right here to quickly infiltrate the soil, and then the roots and the soil food web in the plants do the rest of the work. The image on the right is a rain basin installed by Custom Foodscaping in St. Louis. You see the driveway. It hits this rocky, and there's a weed mat or kind of a liner here for weed suppression and to make sure the water channels into this basin. So the water hits the rain chute, goes into the native plant basin, and then when it overflows, it comes back this way and overflows into the existing drainage that was there. Rain garden, again, is a depressed area which is designed for infiltrating water. The ability to infiltrate water also allows rain gardens to capture sediment and pollution that is being carried by water once it enters the garden. They come in every size imaginable and can be planted or left unplanted depending on the needs of the goals in the project. I would always recommend planting it immediately again. Depending on your soil type and drainage patterns, rain gardens may have a highly permeable material in order to avoid issues with mosquitoes and other issues with ponding. So again, Marcy's question with rain gardens is if you have well-draining soil and your plants are adequately absorbing that and you're not overflowing it, like you're not making it a rain bog rather than a garden, you really want that to infiltrate. If your goal is to make a marsh or a bog, you need to get a lot of diversity of plants and get your dragonfly populations up and your bird populations up and your predatory insect population up to eat the mosquito eggs, and, you know, get a lot of amphibians and get a biologically active wetland essentially. So lots of ways to do it. If you want a really wet rain garden with water in it all the time, or a semi-wet rain garden, or just an infiltration basin. So on the left, you can see our infiltration bioswale. It's in the city's right of way. We've kind of commandeered that property. We have to mow it. So if I have to mow it, I might as well plant it with elderberries and mountain mint, and there's liatris and cardinal flower and swamp milkweed and common milkweed and sneezeweed and lots of plants, you know, lots of diversity and lots of different types of plants and different root systems. There's some 9-bark in there, but you can see the water's popping out of the culvert here. This was yesterday. I was lucky to get out there. Every orange flag is a new plant. We have a problem with buying plants. We can't seem to stop, but there's always spaces to be filled in our landscape. So the water comes through, it overflows up to these wet spots. All the roots of these plants soak up the rain. It kind of has a little check area right here where it pools, and then it overflows and goes into this culvert. And then again, same little check, just a log blocking it. So it has to kind of slow down, you know, slow it, spread it, sink it, slow it down. And then it overflows over the log, hits the next culvert, and keeps going. This is a rain garden in St. Louis. I wish I could get a video or a picture of ours blooming, but it's too early right now. Theirs is all mulched. We don't mulch ours per se. We have planted a lot of sedges and ground covers and a lot of cover crops and things. We want plants in the ground. In biology, the mulch does a lot of benefits, but it's just increased maintenance and increased time and energy. And a lot of these plants don't really like the fungal dominancy of woody mulch. If you go to a prairie, there's not much wood mulch there. So thinking of the plant that you're installing, of the ecosystem that it comes from, and its friends and companions, and what it, who it likes to hang out with and where it likes to hang out, really getting into the roots of your plant and kind of understanding it on that deep level, just like our water. This next image is just a beautiful rendering of rain gardens. You have your roof. A lot of people just, instead of building tanks or anything, they'll pump this. This could go to a diversion swale. We always want to build in relative location and relationships. So here we have a problem of our gutter is washing out our driveway or something, our foundation, and we're going to pipe all that water to a native plant garden to get butterflies and hummingbirds and caterpillars and birds and all the positive things that comes from just having native ecology on your site, but also filtering all that water. You want to, when we shape these, we don't want to just build a circle. We want to have, I'll get to that next, but we want to create an edge effect. So kidney beans are getting more edge and waves on how you shape it. I'll talk about that in a second, but you can kind of read through some of this, but adding other elements, bird baths and edging, and you can make it as fancy as you want or as wild as you want. I'm definitely more of a wild type of guy in my own home. My clients don't always have that same landscape aesthetic, so we definitely have to design for our context and what you like and what it needs to look like and how it needs to feel, and then where your paths are and how you interact with it as well. Another diagram of a residential rain garden. Here again, this keep 10 feet away from structures. I would just eliminate most and just have that general rule of thumb that you should keep any rainwater harvesting structures away from foundations at least 10 feet, or any structures, whether it's a chicken coop, a shed, or a garage, or your home. So again, the water comes off the roof into the gutter, goes to the culvert, or you do a vegetated swale, a rock swale, dry stream bed, bioswale, whatever you want, and pipe it to your rain garden. They absorb it all. You get tons of benefits from planting the natives, and on the edges you could plant food producing, depending on the source of your roof. If it's a metal roof or asphalt roof, or make sure you're having the cleanest way possible of it coming off your roof. And then always design for that overflow. So if this fills up at a 4-inch thunderstorm and the system can't contain it all, it has to go somewhere. So make sure you always plan for that overflow. These are some, this is in Seattle, I believe. It's very pretty compared to mine, and very well managed. A lot of maintenance, but you can see it fills up from the road. They have these channel cuts or curb cuts cut in, infiltrates into the basin, comes off the sidewalk, and then also comes from the gutter. So it's getting hit from all directions. I would say most streets need to be designed in this way from an urban planning standpoint. I just think of South Street and Kimberoo, and when Springfield gets a heavy rain, the whole streets flood. And if we just ripped up some streets and put some basins and some bikeways and greenways, very, very simple stuff, I think we'd all be a lot happier biking around and walking around, and have a better urban living. So on the right is my house. You can see my elderberry hedge, and the water's gone. The pictures earlier, it was flowing. And now the water's gone in a matter of hours. And there's a bunch of plants there, and same thing coming through here. We have this little bridge here and button bush, and this is the lowest point of our property where all the water leaves. So catch as much as we can through all the swales, through all the systems, and eventually it hits here and leaves our property. So we catch as much as possible, but we usually can't catch it all, not in an urban setting at least. I can't build a big pond back there. I got a fence now, so maybe I can. So rain gardens, again, with the shape and edge effects. So if this is our rain garden or our area, we get a lot more edge and a lot more diversity of species that can interact with the site, and how much water we can actually have in there in different depths and different ecosystems. So don't just plant a circle, get funky with it. Plant a bean, plant a spiral, you know, whatever you feel and whatever's contextual to your site. But the more edge you have, the more diversity that you're going to have. So any questions on rainwater or on rain gardens or infiltration, Hannah? If I don't.
We don't currently have any questions, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat.
Sure. All right, we're going to jump to tanks and cisterns, and we're going to talk about principles again. I'm a big principle guy, and it guides everything that you should do. So tank cisterns, number one, ensure adequate inflow. We want to make sure our tanks have proper size gutters, downspouts, and inflow pipes to handle the maximum rainfall intensity. Number two, ensure adequate outflow and use water as a resource. So the diameter of our cistern overflow pipe must be equal to the diameter of the cistern's inflow pipe. The overflow should be directed to another tank or to another infiltration basin. If it's directed to an infiltration basin, it will need to be screened. The overflow pipe should be screened and should drain above the mulch, not the vegetation, to prevent root entry and clogging. So basically this pipe here, if you overflow it, you want to make sure it's covered so these tree roots don't go in it and eventually bust your pipe. Number three, design the system to collect high quality rainwater. Make sure that the water is harvested off of good catchment surfaces with no contaminations. First flush systems are nice. Features meant to avoid the material collected in the first rain from making it into the tank. So a first flush system would be here on this green image. If you follow my mouse, the water comes through, it goes through a leaf diverter kit, and it hits this little flush, comes through, and hits the tank. So we want to clean any debris that we can. I have another example of a more, I would say a better first flush diverter on the next slide. I'll bring that up. Number four, design a closed system that passively filters itself. A cistern or tank needs to be closed or screened from sunlight, insects, and critters. All cistern and downspout openings, inlets, and outlets should be screened. 45-degree bend prevents direct lighting entry into the tank via the downspout. The tank cover will reduce evaporation losses, and the outflow pipe needs to be at minimum 4 inches above the bottom of the cistern to keep sludge of sediments from being pulled under the supply pipe. So when the water enters the tank, you don't want to just sploshing in the bottom there and getting all that, stirring up all the sediments that drop there. Again, with our Google Drive link, we'll have a lot more details in this whole thing here. So sorry if I'm losing you with some of these details. The aim is that we want to keep debris out and sludge from coming out of the faucet. So you want your faucet to be higher up so you're not getting that anaerobic layer that always happens at the bottom. Number five, we need to maintain and access the tank and its interior. So these have little openings at the top. You need a covered tank with tight-fitting lids that's vented to prevent a vacuum from being formed when lots of water's in there. 7, use gravity to your advantage. Elevation of the surface of the catchment and the free power of gravity should be used to collect rainwater and distribute it around the site. Goes back to the other principle of start high in the landscape. So as high as you can put it, you'll have gravity on your side, and hopefully can gravity feed it to your gardens or to your trees or whatever you're watering. Make rainwater use convenient. Select a tank location that is nearby the water source and the destination. Select and place the cistern, number 9, so that it does more than store water. It can be a privacy screen, a fence, a retaining wall, support pillar for a porch, etc. Number 10, maintain the system. Inspect and clean the gutters, Before the rainy systems and in times of leaf drops from surrounding trees, drain the first flush diverter after rainstorms. Check the system periodically to make sure there are no leaks, no inlets are broken, no buildup of sediments. Whew. So with all that, we really want to make sure our gutters are clean. I have a bunch of black walnut trees above my gutter, and they just drop jugalone infused water through our gutters. And I have to get up there and clean them a lot if I want to have a healthy rainwater system, or accept that I'm going to have a lot of black walnut flavored water for all my trees, which that's more the case. So Verge Permaculture up in British Columbia. I think he's outside of Calgary. His name's Rob Avis. He's an engineer, but he's an engineer that has turned, brought that engineering mind and that style to the permaculture world. He's very professional and is a great resource for rainwater harvesting in cold climates. Brad Lancaster, Dolman, and all those folks I spoke about earlier are all in dry, hot areas where it doesn't really freeze. We have a different context here, so we need to be mindful when we have tanks of freezing, and we can't have fully wet systems like they do here. So we have a clean gutter, comes at the point. There's these diverter kits. So say your tank's full or it's winter, you can easily just flip this switch here and it will drain to your original gutter system. When you're harvesting water, you flip the switch and it shoots through this way, hits the leaf diverter, hits the first flush. So we talked, when the rain comes through, it hits this, all the water comes through this pipe first and catches all the sediment, all the walnuts, all the leaves, anything that got through the leaf diverter, and all the sediments come in this pipe. And then it overflows into the tank. And then when the tank fills up, it overflows out to the landscape. So I'll share this image as well on that drive so you can kind of to look at it a lot more. And then Rob Avis has a book called Essential Rainwater Harvesting for the Home and Homestead, which is an ebook for 20-something bucks. It's a very good resource. This is just a little diagram of the leaf catcher. You can make them from a sheet metal shop, or they do sell them commercially at most irrigation facilities. I don't think you can get them at Home Depot or anything like that. And of course, they're on the internet. So here are two different tanks again. This is Custom Foodscaping up in St. Louis. It's an 865-gallon Bushman tank. And this is a 150-gallon Bushman tank. It's a slimline tank. So if you're in a tight spot or you don't like the bulkiness of these big tanks, you can get some of these smaller tanks that a little more aesthetic and a little more space saving, and you can hide them a little easier if aesthetics is a problem for you. I do not recommend the 55-gallon rain drums. We talked about how much water comes off our roof, and I'll show you a calculation here in a second of a 3-inch downpour in our area. So this is Permaculture Artisans tanks, Eric Olson in Sebastopol, California. He's also a big guru in the ecological landscape and permaculture world. But you can see their tank coming in, their first flush, their overflow, and all the other accessories that come through. But they have a fruit tree espaliered onto the tank. And in this image over here, the water comes from the roof. It's actually under their house. And they have a pump, and they pump all the water for all their toilets and all their water needs in their house besides drinking water. And you can get UV filtering and a lot of filtering systems and pumps and pump this into your house that meet all sorts of regulations you have to meet when you bring rainwater inside for potable water. So first flush, this goes to the landscape and then comes in a tank, overflows, goes to landscape again. So we'll talk about a tank capacity for a large storm event. This is the minimum cistern volume needed to capture roof runoff for a 3-inch storm. So we're doing the catchment area, times the rainfall expected, times the gallons, and the runoff coefficient, which is going to be our metal roof of 0.95. So our house, a water harvester with an 812 square foot roof, lives in an area where a single storm or 2 storms just a few days apart can unleash 3 inches of rain. 812 times 0.25 times 7.48 times 0.95 equals 1,400 42 gallons. So 1,442 gallons off a 3-inch storm. So if we get one thunderstorm or a few thunderstorms over 3 days, and it's 3 inches of water, we're getting almost close to 1,500 gallons and that one storm event coming off that roof. If we had a 55-gallon drum there, that would overflow around 27 times. So those little 55-gallon drums don't necessarily, they're not going to help you in times of resilience. They're not going to, they drain really fast. They are a catchment source. I won't write them off completely, but if you're looking to harvest rainwater and provide some resiliency to your home, homestead, or farm, you definitely want to scale up and be able to capture as much as possible and store it in that tank, rather than it just overflowing, every few minutes during a heavy rainfall, especially if you have the infrastructure. But start small. If the 55-gallon is what you have, or the 250-gallon IBC tote, start small and make your system work. And as you grow and learn more, kind of scale up. All right. Any question on tanks?
So far there are no questions, but that tank in Sebastopol is so cool. I'm gonna have to check that out. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, Eric Olson is his name. He runs Permaculture Artisans, and he also runs the Ecological Landscape Mastery School. He's a great resource.
Is that a vine growing around it? Is that like bougainvillea?
No, it's actually a tree. It's a fruit tree, so it's growing up.
Really?
So it eventually will screen and that's what we said, stacking function. So it's a rainwater tank, but it's also a structure for this tree, and it's a spalliate, which means they train it on these guide wires, and it makes it easier to harvest and more aesthetic and whatnot.
So cool.
It's a horticultural technique. But yeah, I would check out, if you're that way, go check out Eric Olson and some of his projects. He's doing some pretty great things. He comes from the activist world and putting it all into practice.
Cool.
For you bigger scale guys, we talked about, for anyone over 5 acres, keyline design may be a great use, and even smaller scale, with a broad fork, you can utilize some of this. This is Mark Shepard's farm up in Viola, Wisconsin, a 106-acre GMO cornfield and oat field and soybean field that was transformed into a perennial oasis of chestnuts, hazelnuts, mulberries, apples, pears, peaches, persimmons, et cetera, the list goes on. But you can see, we talked about those contour lines. So this is key lines in the most basic way. It's a very complex design system, but in the most basic way, it's simplified contours. So we take those contour lines and we straighten them out so we can drive our tractors through them and make it easier for production, rather than the big wavy topography that is, just kind of everywhere. So essentially what we do here is there's a keyline tractor or a keyline plow, which is a little boot and shank that pulls these rips. So when water comes through, it falls into these little rips. You can still mow, you can still cattle. There's no swale, there's no berm. You don't notice it in the landscape. It's not obstructive like a swale or any of the other earthworks we've talked about. I highly advocate this system more for the broadacre farm, production, commercial farms, and even people that are regenerating pastures or foraging or anything, just because it's less damaging to the landscape and less invasive. So these keyline swales they pull water from the valley towards the ridges. So those little shanks and of the plow, it's not really a plow, but it just builds that little rip, and it forces water to the ridges up here. So all this water is going to this point. And he's got asparagus and squash and fruit trees and nut trees through these systems. But just an alternative. I'm not going to go into too many details here. This is, if anyone is more interested, I'd be happy to include some more stuff in that Google Drive on keyline design and cultivation. But on a small scale, we can do this with a broad fork, and we mark out our contours, and if they're wavy or difficult to deal with, we can kind of straighten them out and change the landscape to to fit our needs. Go ahead, Anna.
Yes, we have a question from Justine Campbell. Do you know of a good test kit for the rainwater? Using rainwater for agriculture setting when selling produce, I would have to test my water and to prove it's safe. So it sounds like she's rinsing her produce with rainwater.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you? I need to see the question on that one.
It's in the Q&A.
Yeah, I just don't know how to find it on my, because I'm sharing my screen. Oh, Q&A right there. Do you know of a good test kit for the rainwater? I personally do not know of a test kit, but I know there are a lot of regulations when you use rainwater, and that's where the UV, a lot of people will send them to labs, but they'll, a lot of farmers and commercial producers will run it through a UV filtration system, and some of those get expensive real fast. You know, there's other filtration systems, but yeah, I think legally you have to have it tested by a lab before you can sell to show that it's safe. And it depends if you're organic certified or naturally certified and grow it or whatever that case may be. But you take all the liability with that when you do rainwater for production. You know, when you produce for yourself and you know it's clean and you're comfortable with it, you should still test it. If you're rinsing and cleaning and making it a potable water source. I believe I had, let me go back a few. I have a resource I came across of when I was making these slides on that, Justine, and I'll send you it. And
Isn't there a type of tincture or some sort of liquid that you can put in water and it'll kind of equalize the water, make it potable?
That's not a chemical. That's an herbal tincture, or is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I seem to remember there's something like that.
Yeah, I'm not aware, and I don't know if the USDA or whoever would find that as appropriate for commercial, but that's something if you find the source of that, I'd be interested in checking it out.
Yeah, it looks like we might have to get back to you on that one, Justine.
Yeah. I guess you can see my screen, huh? Trying to get rid of, yeah, there we go. Trying to get rid of that. All right.
We have a question from John Raven. I'd be careful about concentration of heavy metals, chemicals due to evaporation.
Sure, yeah, your catchment surface is probably the most important thing. You want to make sure you have a clean, that's why your gutters are clean, make sure there's not bird pooping and things on your roof, and make sure the roof that you're using is a high quality metal roof, or and it depends what you're using your water for. If you're putting it on fruit trees or it's going to a rain basin, you know, you don't have to worry about those things. But if you're starting to get into more of the potable water, that's a whole other set of regulations and a whole other set of constraints that you have to deal with. If you're rinsing water or if you're plumbing it into your house, you know, you get other regulatory agencies involved and you have to meet their standards, and that's different for each municipality and each county and each local government. So, but always make sure that your catchment is as clean as possible. And if it's not clean, you don't use it for food production or whatever the case may be. We use our rainwater for watering our gardens and our plants, but we're not rinsing or spraying it directly on our plants itself. And I would argue that chlorine and chloramine and a lot of the things that regulatory agencies use to clean our water and drink is not healthy either. So just the devil's advocate on clean water. I mean, it doesn't have bacteria and things in it, but you know, there's a dark side to every story. So if there's no more questions on that, I'm gonna jump to terraces and check dams. Terraces, I guess I deleted my notes for that, but terraces have been used for a very, very long time. You can see in China these beautiful systems, highly laborious, and have a lot of labor involved in them. But if you have a steep slope to level them out, they're very expensive, and if they fail big. So if you go higher than 2-3 foot, make sure to consult an engineer with these. But you can do terraces on contour. If you're just doing one rock dams or check dams, you can see in this top picture, we have a piece of Osage orange hedge apple tree that's laid on contour, and then it's mulched. It's very, very simple. It's got these hedge stakes that we cut with the chainsaw, and then there's some concrete stakes as well that's used, just an iron rod to hold it. But very simple. It's collecting all the sediment from uphill. It's collecting all the water, slowing it down high in the landscape. And you can see where it leaks through here for a little wet spot that should be planted with some natives. On this bottom right, you see a valley coming through this landscape where this client was having some erosion problems, and they needed some forest clearing as well. So we took all the black locust and some of the trees that they were going to haul off, and we used them for basically check dams. So I start at the top, the water comes down, hits this, slows down, deposits nutrients and organic materials. It overflows, it hits this one, it overflows, it hits this one, it overflows, it hits this one, et cetera, before it leaves the property. And that has mitigated their erosion control on this hillside. There's a lot of water coming off of this barn roof up here, and then all this, the neighboring properties up the hill. Same principle on the left here. This is Eric Olson's in Sebastopol, California. He did a commercial lavender installation on this property, but it's a steep slope, and then it's just pieces of wood that are staked in to break it up. Very, very simple, not a complex terrace. Again, 5-6 foot down slope before it starts getting very erosive and the velocity of the water picks up. It hits another check dam, and same thing, go down, down, down. And then when it hits the bottom, it's a diversion swale away from the home, which is right over here. You can see this rock terrace here on the right. This is a project we did in Troy, Missouri, outside of St. Louis. They had a bunch of limestone boulders, and this is a pretty steep slope here, and it levels out down this way. But all the limestone boulders are used as a terrace, so the water that's coming off the roof that overflows their tank over here comes down into this terrace bed, and this is their annual garden bed. So terraces are great for leveling out steep slopes and providing access and providing agricultural production. Another integrated part of this is all the rainwater that there's tanks under this awning here, and when they overflow, they go underground into this dry stream bed, which kind of meanders. This is all planted now, but just gravel, rock bed over here, and then they have a terraced seating area on the slope as well. So we don't build too many terraces, but when we do, we always consult with engineers. They can be a big liability when they fail, so make sure they're designed right and have adequate drainage behind them, and just make sure you do it right if you're building them big. This is an urban landscape harvesting toolkit out of California as well. This is Larry Santoya of Earth Flow Designs. And he took some of these from Lancaster's, but the mulch, the swales and berms, the terraces, French drains and basins and sunken beds. But, just kind of an interesting infographic that I thought I'd share. And some of our favorite rain plants for the Ozarks. I could go on forever about plants. It's really a passion of mine, but things we have on our property and that we try to get others to plant, all native grasses and sedges. I love the Pennsylvania sedge and the tussock sedge, but short sedge, fox sedge, palm sedge, globe sedge. I mean, the more diversity, if you mix 10, 15 different sedges into a group, you get a lot of diversity of different caterpillars or different attractants and different root systems, in different environments, but you have a lot of texture and different, it looks different than just planting a monoculture of, say, one type of sedge. Plant a bunch of different sedges that you're going to be your ground cover. River oats, switchgrass, soft rush. I like to plant little blue stem even in our rain areas on the edge to give it some structure and some height. And then perennial flowers, there's a wide array. And most resources in Missouri, somebody will tell you it's a rain garden plant. Somebody will tell you it has wet feet, it likes wet. Another resource will say it's a dry plant. So use your discretion on that. These are plants that that go into the wild, into a wetland. What's growing there, kind of interact with that natural space and kind of try to mimic as much as possible on the plant communities that exist there. But we like swamp milkweed, common milkweed, lady ferns. I like the ostrich ferns and other ferns as well if it's shady. Joe Pye weed, sneezeweed, irises, southern blue flags, cardinal flowers, bergamots, obedient plants, mountain mints, orange cone flowers, Culver's roots, and the blazing stars. I'm more of a shrub, woody species kind of guy, so we have a lot of false indigo planted, aronia, which is edible, pawpaw is edible, buttonbush, spicebush, 9-bark. If you can plant one shrub, I would call that it. It's a super deep root system, and we'll just keep going down, and keep digging, and will act as a structural sponge for the rest of your garden. If you can't fit a tree in, I think the 9-barks or the New Jersey teas are a great shrub to put in. Then you have the witch hazels, deciduous, holly, winterberry, or possum haw. Of course, the elderberry medicinal plants, hazelnuts, and then you can get to the bigger trees, the swamp white oaks, river birches, and sycamores. And this list is by no means complete. There are hundreds of thousands more, I'm sure, of ground covers and vines and shrubs and trees that you could include in this. I would focus on native plants, and if they're not native, they should have lots of functions of food production or fuel production, or not just pretty. Try to expand and stack functions on what you're planting and how they interact with the native ecology and the space, and how they can benefit you and your family. Some final thoughts. We're nearing the end here. Start small. Start with that shovel. Start with your eyes and your rain jacket and your boots first, and get out there and play in the rain. Locate in relationships. Plan off your gutters. Plan off your existing natural drainages. Utilize what you have already. Fix problems. If it was that erosion problem in relationship with watering your garden or building a native plant habitat, or whatever the case may be, but utilize your water harvesting to fix a problem and provide a solution for yourself and your neighbors. I always use a combination of techniques, not just the ones you like. There's those people that get stuck in the swales and they never get out. So rain tank overflows in the swale that discharges in the rain garden that goes into a culvert, or there's many combinations and many different ways to do it. It could be a terracing, or the key line, or the broad forked bed, or just a healthy soil all over the lot. Don't get stuck on one thing, but see what's most appropriate for your site. Plant the structures immediately. So after you do any earthworks and there's bare ground, seed it, mulch it, cover it, armor it. Mother Nature does not want to be bare. Cover her up. And avoid these mistakes, non-existent overflow spillways. I see a lot of clients and a lot of people that build these, they never build the overflows. You have to build it. That water will fill up eventually, and if it does, it can blow out the system or blow out your swale. So make sure you have your overflows for everything. Same thing with your rainwater tanks. Make sure your overflow is going away from your house if it's close to your house. That's a rule of thumb. You have to have it. Sizing of the system. Make sure you use your calculations. Don't undersize or oversize, and use the shovel first. Again, start small before you bring out that excavator or skid steer or whatever. I personally like the excavator if I'm going to use equipment, but bring the shovel or the pickaxe first and make it small. And don't make it too complicated. Keep it simple. Some simple grading, just going out there with a shovel and making a quick fix and seeing how it reacts, I think is some great advice, is to just keep it simple. We don't need these. You could hire a professional rainwater harvesting company to come out and install a $40,000 system. or you could hook up a tank or build a little structure or start building soil. So keep it simple and connect those. Some great resources here that I highly recommend. These are the top 6 I would recommend for rainwater harvesting. Brad Lancaster's, both of his books. The blue book is an introductory book, volume 1. The green book is a comprehensive graphs, charts, calculations, design guidelines. If you wanted more details out of this presentations that you didn't get, that is the book to get. It will not let you down. Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway has some water harvesting stuff. The Designer's Manual by Bill Mollison. The Agrarian's Handbook, again, is a hardcore water harvesting book that will give you tons of infographics, tons of pictures, tons of engineered calculations for farms and broad acre, and just very, very comprehensive. And then if you want to scale that down a little to more of the more homeowner scale, the Rainwater Harvesting Guide to Home Scale System by Rob Avis and Michelle Avis of Verge Permaculture is a invaluable resource as well. I did want to talk about these 4 programs from the city of Springfield. If you're in city limits, there's the Blooming Boulevards. This is new. So all my right-of-way plantings, I guess, were technically illegal before this program, but it's a new opportunity for property owners to plant and manage rain gardens in partnership with the city. So they manage the right-of-way near their home. So that's a cool program. The Rain Bale Rebate, if you do buy a tank, the James River Basin Partnership will give you a rebate, 50 cents per gallon. So that's up to $300. So if you buy a big tank, that's $1,000, you'll get $300 off. So try to scale up a bit from that 55 gallon if you have the financial ability, or if you find some sweet thing on an abandoned farm or whatever the case may be. You can get some money back with a Rain Barrel Rebate Program from James River Basin Partnership. James River Basin Partnership also has free soil testing for lawns. So if you have a lawn and you want to get your soil tested, go for it. I'm not too familiar with the Dish to Dirt composting. There's a Springfield Compost Collective I would go to for composting questions myself, and then just making sure that you have biologically active compost. There's a lot of people that market compost that is not compost. And then also the Neighborhoods program, where you can get free trees and get involved in their Neighborhoods program. So I would check out those things and those resources in the city of Springfield. They're definitely moving in the right direction with some of these programs and getting more natives and rainwater harvesting infrastructure in the city. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And yeah, thank you for your time. And it's definitely hard to sit through a 2-hour webinar, and I'm not a webinar kind of guy. So thanks for your
That was so informational. You did such a good job. That was so great.
Thank you.
In the chat, Justine had that question about rainwater for veggies. John Raven included in the chat 2 links, one to the CDC on emergency drinking, disinfecting the cisterns, which is cool. And then another one, the watershed committee.org, which I think you might have included.
I do have the watershed committee's a PDF. They have their own whole kind of document that is in that Google Drive that will be shared. So it has a lot of that in there as well.
Yeah, Marcy asked, thank you for the great information. Can you remind us again the name of your business?
Sure. Yeah, it's right there at the bottom, Ozark Mountain Permaculture.
Cool.
We're on Facebook and Instagram. We just had another child, so we haven't updated our website or anything. We're kind of got our head above water, but we're making it.
Jeremy Jackson asked, is there a Google Drive link? We received all of the emails from everyone who's registered, and so if you have submitted your email, which of course you have if you're here, you will get information via email in regards to all of that.
And Jeremy,
Awesome.
if you're on that Google Drive link from the workshops, I just updated it, and there's a water harvesting tab in that if you're shared on that, which I think you are. But if not, we'll resend all the links to everyone who had an email and is interested in checking out some more resources. And feel free to add to it.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that there's a survey at the end of this Zoom call, and the survey is what keeps us getting funding from the USDA so that we can have these workshops. So once we end this call, be on the lookout for that survey, you guys.